When a narcissist realizes that their grip on you is loosening, the first thing they feel is not anger, it's fear. A deep, almost primal fear. Because their sense of control, the illusion that they are the center of your emotional universe, begins to unravel. It's important to understand that narcissists thrive not on love, not on connection, but on reaction. Your anger, your tears, your explanations. All of these are fuel. As long as you are reacting, they are winning. They know they've occupied your mind, and in their world, that is victory. But something remarkable happens when you stop playing that game. When you withdraw the very fuel they rely on, you send a message far louder than words. You no longer control me. And though you may not see it immediately, this is the exact moment the power dynamic shifts. What once seemed like their dominance was only ever borrowed energy. Energy they siphoned from you. Without it, they are left with nothing but the echo of their own emptiness. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That's precisely what narcissists do. They build a false self to avoid looking into the abyss of who they really are. And your silence, your refusal to react, becomes a mirror. It shows them the emptiness they've been running from. Suddenly, their tricks don't work. Their words no longer pierce. Their presence no longer shakes you. This is not just unsettling for them. It is devastating. At first, they may respond with confusion. They'll test the waters, poke at your boundaries, escalate their behavior in the hope of pulling you back into the dance. But what they're really trying to do is restore the old script. The one where you react and they control. When you refuse, they are forced into uncharted territory. For perhaps the first time, they must face a world where their tactics fail. And failure, to the narcissist, is unbearable. This is where your inner work comes in. Winning against a narcissist is not about defeating them with arguments or exposing them with proof. It's about mastering yourself. It's about refusing to be baited into cycles that only drain your spirit. In many ways, the battle is not with them. It's with your own impulses, your need to explain, your instinct to prove your worth. The moment you conquer that within yourself, the narcissist has already lost. Think of it this way: when you stop reacting, you reclaim time, energy, and dignity. You become grounded in your own reality rather than caught in theirs. And this grounding is something they cannot touch. It's what Jung called individuation. The process of becoming whole, no longer fragmented by the opinions and manipulations of others. In this space, you are no longer a pawn in their story. You are the author of your own. So the shift in power is not just about them realizing they've lost control. It's about you realizing you've gained it. And once you experience that, there's no going back. You don't need to shout your victory. You don't need to prove it to anyone. The calm strength you carry is proof enough. The narcissist may never admit it, but in the silence of your detachment, they know. They know they've lost the one thing they depended on most: your reaction. And that loss cuts deeper than any confrontation ever could. Remember this: the greatest power you will ever have over a narcissist is not in what you say, but in what you refuse to give. Your peace is their defeat. And your silence is the loudest victory of all. Illusion is the lifeblood of the narcissist. Their entire existence is carefully constructed around a mask, a false self they've crafted to appear untouchable, flawless, even superior. They need the world to see them as strong because deep within, they are terrified of weakness. They crave recognition because, at their core, they are haunted by insignificance. When you believed that mask, when you gave into it, they thrived. But the moment you stop participating in that illusion, something profound happens. Their carefully built facade begins to crack. Carl Jung often spoke about the persona, the social mask we all wear to navigate the expectations of society. For most people, the persona is a flexible tool, a way of presenting ourselves, while still remaining rooted in our authentic self. For the narcissist, however, the persona becomes everything. It consumes them. Their identity is no longer grounded in who they truly are, but in the image they project. The tragedy is that they are imprisoned by their own performance. When you no longer reinforce that performance, when you stop validating, stop excusing, stop being an audience, they are left alone with the unbearable truth. The image they have lived for is just a shadow. Without your belief in their greatness, they are confronted with the hollowness of their own invention. And this is not a small wound. It is a collapse of the very structure that sustains them. You see, narcissists cannot tolerate reality as it is. Reality threatens to reveal them as ordinary, fragile, even deeply wounded. That is why they cling to grandiosity, why they rewrite stories to make themselves the hero or the victim, depending on which role will win attention. They cannot simply be human, they must always be more. But when you step out of the illusion, you refuse to play a role in their theater. And without an audience, the theater goes dark. At first, they may attempt to double down. They may inflate their stories even further, boast louder, or try to demean you to restore their sense of superiority. But these are desperate acts. Underneath, they know something has shifted. The collapse of their illusions is not always visible on the surface. It's often masked with arrogance, with denial, with aggression. Yet beneath those defenses lies a deep and unsettling truth they can no longer avoid. The mask has been seen through. For you, this moment is liberating. It is the point where you stop mistaking appearance for essence. You begin to see clearly that the narcissist's confidence was only bravado, their dominance only manipulation, their certainty only noise. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Their illusion loses its power over you, and clarity becomes your strength. Philosophically, this collapse mirrors the archetypal moment of awakening, the shattering of false gods, the disintegration of illusions that once governed us. It is painful to watch someone unravel, yes, but it is also profoundly freeing. Because it means you are no longer bound to their narrative. You are no longer living inside their story. You have stepped into your own. The narcissist, however, is left with a frightening question. If I am not the mask, then who am I? And that is the one question they cannot bear to face. So they will often scramble, deflect, or attack to avoid it. But the truth remains, once their illusions collapse, they can never fully rebuild them in your presence. You know too much now. And here lies the essence of your victory. Not in humiliating them, not in proving them wrong, but in refusing to participate in the lie any longer. You've chosen reality over illusion, authenticity over performance. And that choice is what dismantles their power at its very core. Remember this, illusions only live as long as we believe in them. The moment you stop feeding them, they starve. And when a narcissist's illusion collapses, it is not just their mask that shatters. It is the entire false kingdom they built upon it. Your refusal to believe becomes the light that dissolves their shadow. When the narcissist senses that their power is slipping, they do not fade quietly into the background. They surge forward with a kind of frantic energy, desperate to pull you back into the orbit of their control. This is what I call the desperation phase. It is not calm, not rational, not graceful. It is a storm designed to overwhelm you, to make you doubt yourself, to tempt you into returning to the familiar cycle of reaction and submission. But what's crucial to see is that this surge of intensity is not strength. It is evidence of their unraveling. Carl Jung described neurosis as the suffering of a soul that has not discovered its meaning. For the narcissist, control is their meaning. It is their substitute for love, for intimacy, for wholeness. When control is threatened, their entire psychological structure trembles. This trembling manifests as desperation, gaslighting, guilt-tripping, rage, sudden affection, even dramatic displays of victimhood. They will shift shapes endlessly, not because they are powerful, but because they are terrified. Terrified of losing the one thing that props up their fragile self, your attention. Think about it. If they truly were as strong, as superior, as untouchable as they claim, would they need to resort to such frantic measures to hold you? Would they need to shout, manipulate, or beg? The very fact that they scramble is proof of their weakness. Desperation unmasks them in a way nothing else can. It shows you that their control was never solid, never absolute. It was always fragile, always dependent on your participation. In this phase, you will be tested. The narcissist may suddenly turn sweet again, flooding you with kindness or nostalgia, reminding you of the best moments, promising change. And in the next breath, they may erupt in anger, hurling accusations, attacking your character, twisting your words. These extremes are not contradictions, they are tactics. Each one is designed to pull you back into the cycle where they feel safe and you feel trapped. The key is to remember that these extremes are not about you. They are about their fear of losing the role they've written for themselves. Philosophically, this desperation can be seen as the archetypal shadow thrashing in its final struggle. Jung taught that the shadow, the dark, rejected part of the psyche, fights hardest when it is being exposed. The narcissist's shadow is built on dependency, insecurity, and fear of abandonment. When you no longer respond as you once did, that shadow rises violently, refusing to go quietly. But in its intensity, it reveals itself fully. You begin to see not a powerful figure, but a frightened soul flailing in the dark. And this is where your growth is tested. The temptation will be to re-engage, to explain yourself, to soothe them, or to lash back in anger. But to do so is to step back into the web. The real act of strength is to recognize desperation for what it is, the last attempt of a collapsing system to sustain itself. The more chaotic they become, the clearer it is that you are already winning. The narcissist will not admit this. They will never say, "I feel powerless and I am losing control." Instead, They will disguise it as urgency, as drama, as righteousness. But you must learn to see beneath the disguise. Their desperation is not about truth. It is about survival. And once you recognize this, you can stand firm without being pulled into their chaos. Remember this: the louder they fight, the weaker they are. Desperation is not dominance. It is collapse in motion. And if you can hold your ground through the storm, you will discover that the storm was nothing more than noise. Their frenzy is the clearest sign that you've already stepped beyond their reach. One of the most unsettling experiences for a narcissist is not when you argue with them, not when you fight back, and not even when you expose them. It is when you hold up a mirror. This is what happens when you no longer feed their illusions, when you no longer react to their provocations, when you stand still and simply reflect back reality. In that moment, they are forced to see themselves as they truly are. And for someone who has spent their life running from that truth, it is unbearable. Carl Jung often spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. The narcissist's entire existence is an elaborate attempt to hide their shadow, to bury their fragility beneath arrogance, to mask their insecurity with grandiosity. But when you stop reacting, when you detach, your silence acts like a mirror. Suddenly, their reflection is unavoidable. They cannot escape it. The very thing they have spent years avoiding, facing themselves, is now staring back at them through you. This is why your calm unnerves them more than your anger ever could. Anger they know how to use. Tears they know how to exploit. But composure, indifference, a grounded presence that refuses to engage, that is terrifying, because it strips them of their script. They no longer know their role, and without a role, they are forced to confront the emptiness behind the mask. What they see in that mirror is not what they want to see. They see someone powerless without manipulation, someone small without control, someone ordinary without the pedestal they built for themselves. And to them, ordinary feels like annihilation. It is not just the loss of power. It is the death of the identity they've clung to. But here is where the psychology deepens. The mirror effect is not really about you showing them something new. It's about you refusing to carry their projections anymore. Narcissists survive by projecting their shadow onto others. They make you feel weak so they can feel strong. They make you feel guilty so they can feel innocent. They distort your sense of reality so they don't have to face their own. When you refuse to hold those projections, when you hand them back, they are left holding their own darkness. And in that instant, the mask slips. It's important to remember that the narcissist's reflection in your mirror is not pretty. It can trigger rage, denial, or retreat. They may lash out, accuse you of cruelty, or try to flip the narrative entirely. But this reaction is not proof of strength. It's proof of exposure. For the first time, they are confronted with an image they cannot easily escape themselves, unmasked and unadorned. For you, this is the turning point. The mirror effect frees you as much as it confronts them. Because once you see that their power depended on you carrying their shadow, you realize you never needed to. You were never as weak, as wrong, or as dependent as they wanted you to believe. You were simply reflecting what they could not face in themselves. And when you stop doing that, you reclaim yourself. Philosophically, this moment is profound. It is the archetypal confrontation with truth. Jung would call it the encounter with the shadow, the point at which illusion gives way to reality. For the narcissist, it is destabilizing. For you, it is liberating. And liberation always comes with clarity. You realize that their power was never real. It was only ever borrowed from your willingness to carry what they refused to hold. So when the mirror is finally raised, and they see themselves stripped of illusion, you must remember this. Their reflection is not your burden, it is theirs. And your greatest act of strength is to let them face it without rescuing them from it. The mirror effect is not about defeating them. It is about freeing yourself. Because when the narcissist is forced to face their reflection, you are no longer their canvas. You are your own person again. And in that silent act of truth, you have already won. True victory over the narcissist is not found in revenge, in winning an argument, or in exposing them to the world. It is found in your freedom. It is the moment you realize that their words no longer dictate your emotions, that their presence no longer unsettles your peace, that their approval or disapproval no longer defines your worth. This is the quiet triumph, the kind of victory that does not need to be announced because it is lived. And for the narcissist, this freedom is their greatest defeat. Carl Jung observed that the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, is the essence of human development. Individuation is about reclaiming all the parts of yourself that you once gave away to others, consciously or unconsciously. With a narcissist, you give away more than you realize. You hand them your sense of reality, your self-esteem, your boundaries. You shape your responses around their moods. You adjust your truth to avoid their anger. You sacrifice authenticity for the illusion of peace. In doing so, your identity becomes fragmented, scattered across the battlefield of their control. But when you begin to reclaim these pieces, when you say, "This belongs to me," something shifts inside you. You start to inhabit your own life again. You speak with clarity, not fear. You act from conviction, not from a need to appease. You begin to trust your own perception, rather than waiting for theirs to validate it. This is freedom, and it is far more threatening to a narcissist than any confrontation could ever be. Because it proves, beyond doubt, that their influence over you has ended. To them, this is intolerable. They depend on the idea that you are tied to them, that you cannot function without their approval, that your sense of self rises and falls with their moods. When you live freely, when you thrive outside of their orbit, you shatter this fantasy. And in their world, where control is the only form of love they understand, your independence feels like betrayal. But in reality, it is simply the restoration of what was always yours. What makes this freedom powerful is that it does not require the narcissist's recognition. They may never acknowledge your growth. They may never admit defeat, but they cannot touch the fact that you are no longer captive. Your energy is no longer theirs to drain. Your mind is no longer theirs to confuse. Your heart is no longer theirs to manipulate. This detachment is not coldness. It is wholeness. And wholeness is the one thing they cannot destroy. Jung spoke of freedom not as escape, but as integration. The ability to stand fully in yourself, to be both aware of your shadow and guided by your light. In this sense, your victory is not against them, but for yourself. You do not win by destroying the narcissist. You win by becoming whole again. And once you touch that wholeness, you realize they never had real power at all. What they held was borrowed, and you have simply taken it back. The beauty of this freedom is that it radiates. Others can see it in the way you carry yourself, in the calmness of your presence, in the certainty of your choices. You no longer need to explain why you walked away or why you stopped reacting. The freedom itself is explanation enough. And this is where the narcissist truly loses. Not because you set out to defeat them, but because you no longer need them. You have discovered the profound truth that life is richer, fuller, and infinitely more peaceful when you are no longer chained to their chaos. So remember this: the greatest act of defiance against a narcissist is not anger, it is freedom. Your wholeness is their undoing, and your peace is proof that you have already won. When the dust finally settles, there comes a silence. Not the kind of silence that is empty, but the kind that speaks volumes. For the narcissist, this silence is haunting. It is the absence of the energy they once fed on, the absence of your emotional availability, the absence of your presence in their drama. And while they may mask it with indifference, arrogance, or the performance of moving on, underneath there is a void. That void is their truest companion when they realize you are no longer within their grasp. Carl Jung often reminded us that what we do not make conscious will appear in our lives as fate. For the narcissist, this silence is a cruel kind of fate. They have spent their entire life avoiding their inner emptiness by filling it with noise, control, manipulation, and the endless pursuit of validation. But when you step away, when you no longer provide that noise, they are left alone with the very emptiness they fear most. In this sense, your absence becomes their mirror, reflecting back the hollowness they cannot escape. And yet, for you, this same silence is not haunting. It is healing. It is the space where your mind begins to rest, where your spirit begins to recover, where your energy begins to flow back toward yourself. What feels to them like punishment feels to you like peace. This contrast is profound. The same silence that torments them liberates you. The aftermath is not always dramatic. Often, it is marked by subtle realizations. The narcissist tries, in small ways, to pull you back. An unexpected message, a sudden display of vulnerability, a rumor meant to reach your ears. But these gestures lack their former weight. They no longer penetrate because you are no longer bound by the old dynamics. Their attempts fall flat, and with each failed effort, the reality sinks deeper into them. The power they once wielded has dissolved. Philosophically, this is the moment when illusion gives way to truth in its purest form. Jung called it the confrontation with the self, the stripping away of falsehood until only reality remains. For the narcissist, the reality is devastating. Without someone to control, they must face themselves. For you, the reality is liberating. Without their control, you finally face yourself. The paths diverge here, you toward wholeness, them toward repetition. Because that is what awaits them, repetition. Without change, without the willingness to confront their shadow, the narcissist remains trapped in their cycle. They will seek another stage, another audience, another person to drain. Their fate is circular. But you are no longer part of that circle. You've stepped outside of it, into the spiral of growth that moves forward, not endlessly around. And this is the ultimate aftermath. They remain stuck. You move on. They remain bound by their illusions. You live in truth. They remain in noise. You embrace silence. What they experience as loss, you experience as rebirth. It's tempting to imagine that they suffer endlessly without you. But that is not where your victory lies. Your victory lies in no longer caring whether they do or not. Because your focus has shifted inward, toward building, toward healing, toward becoming whole. You realize that the end of their control was never just about them losing. It was about you reclaiming. So when the silence comes, do not fear it. Do not mistake it for emptiness. It is the sound of your freedom settling into place. It is the space in which your life expands, unshackled, unmanipulated, undisturbed. For the narcissist, that silence is defeat. For you, it is the first true taste of peace. And peace is the kind of victory that needs no applause. It is complete in itself. Remember this, their greatest punishment is your absence, but your greatest reward is your presence. Fully alive, fully whole, fully free. And that is the ending they never saw coming.